Playing through games is fun, especially Kingdom Hearts games. But you know what's even more fun? When you keep playing after you beat the final boss. Sure, I spent 25 hours going through the story, but there was another 30 after exploring every nook and cranny of the world, finding every chest and collectible, synthesizing gear, and completing Jiminy's journal. All of this, and for what? To get some digital trophies on PlayStation? No, for glory. To overcome some greater power. The ultimate challenge after all of this training. To make it all worth something. And luckily, there's a ton of these powers. Superbosses are a trend the Kingdom Hearts series has carried through most of its games, a grand test of the key mechanics learned throughout your journey. Some of the games have a lot, and others not so much. But the variance of Kingdom Hearts is part of the fun. So let's look at Superbosses from this series and how they've changed over time. Kingdom Hearts Superbosses. How strong are they? Are they fun? Let's find out. Starting with the start of it all, Kingdom Hearts 1. The genre-bending game that combined action, RPG, and platforming elements into one in a way that holds up really well even 20 years later. By the time we got to the final iteration of the game, Final Mix, there were a whopping 5 superbosses. So let's start today with the very first superboss in the series, Phantom. In the original release of this game in Japan, Phantom was the only superboss to challenge the player. Found in Neverland at the Clock Tower, Phantom is what I believe to be the best puzzle boss in Kingdom Hearts 1. You have to fight him in a way that's totally unique from every other fight in the game. He has an orb in his stomach that will change colors, and you have to use the corresponding magic or attack to damage him. Along with that, you have to manage your MP to both hit the boss and stop the clock tower. This boss is a great representation of Kingdom Hearts 1 as a whole. It has elements of action and RPG games as well as environmental interaction. Getting into the international release of the game, they added 3 more bosses. Ice Titan is now available through the Gold Match in Olympus Coliseum, and he's another puzzle boss with a unique fight. He is huge, so much so that his weak point isn't reachable for most of the fight. You have to deflect icicles with attacks or guards to hit his head and make him vulnerable. Once he is vulnerable, you'll have a limited time to attack him before he stands up again and the process repeats. This boss is a lot more straightforward than Phantom, focusing more on executing the deflections than managing and using your MP. Overall, not too difficult of a boss once you learn the solution. Unlike another member of the Coliseum, the Platinum Match, a one-on-one fight with Sephiroth, the guy from Final Fantasy VII. This fight is the peak of action combat in Cage 1, requiring mastery of timing to either parry or dodge his attacks. Sephiroth has several attacks with his long sword and more mobility than most bosses in the game, and he is immune to all magic, so you'll have to set up your abilities and gear for physical combos and healing. He staggers if hit at the correct time and will have a set amount of hits before retaliating. He also has a really unique attack with Heartless Angel, where he chances to cast a spell that will set Sora's HP to 1 and MP to 0. But it can also be cancelled if you react accordingly and hit him. Being generally thought of as the hardest boss in this release, he has 3 phases of increasing difficulty, with a variety of attacks and patterns that the player will have to learn. This boss takes the basic elements you learned fighting Riku on Destiny Islands and pushes them to their limit. The final boss in this version of the game is Kurt Ziza in Agrabah.
He's got a sword!
Kurt Ziza uses a mix of the puzzle and action elements we've seen so far. The fight starts with him silencing Sora, making him unable to use magic, so you'll want to start like most bosses, dodging his attacks as you see them, but otherwise hitting him with the X button, until he gets to his next phase, where he creates a barrier around himself and floats around throwing magic attacks at Sora. Physical hits do no damage to the barrier, but produce MP orbs, giving you the hint that offensive magic is needed to break it. Once the barrier is broken, the party has an opening to freely attack. Then he goes into the first phase where Sora is silenced and it's a physical fight. This forces the player to come in equipped to handle both distinct phases. And that takes us to the final superboss that was added in the Final Mix versions of the game, Unknown. He is often the boss that competes with Sephiroth for the title of hardest boss in Cage 1, and it's clear to see why once the fight starts. Fought in Hollow Bastion, he's a looming presence with a variety of attacks spread over 3 phases. Damaging him relies mostly on physical hits, but he can be fought with magic, notably having an interaction where gravity magic stuns him. Similar to Sephiroth, learning his attack patterns to dodge and parry is key, since he staggers and retaliates at consistent points in the fight. He also has the increased mobility of Sephiroth, teleporting to close gaps and stay aggressive. Unknown is maybe most important in that he starts a trend where one of the secret bosses is a hint to a future game in the series. If you didn't know, Unknown is actually Xemnas, the final boss of Cage 2. And the text lines from him hint towards the existence of nobodies. Overall, the first game ended up with a great set of bosses and gives the player plenty to train for. Each fight is satisfying in its own way, whether that be solving the puzzle, learning the patterns, or just overpowering them with your late game gear. Chain of Memories and Rechain of Memories don't have any super bosses, so we'll jump straight into Kingdom Hearts 2, where the camera is zoomed out and the pants are longer. This game resembles the first, but you can definitely feel a change. KH2 moves more towards boss fights taking place in flat arenas rather than the platforming environments from KH1. There's also a much bigger emphasis on learning their patterns to find openings, rather than using a specific spell or ability. Similar to the first game, there's only one real super boss in the first release of KH2. This time, it's the returning Sephiroth. Comparing his fight in each game gives a good idea of how the combat and boss gameplay has changed between them. The fight starts with probably the biggest change to bosses, reaction commands, which appear in several normal and super boss fights. Some of these reaction commands can just be mashed, but super bosses tend to add negative commands to prevent the player from spamming the button. Another thing you'll notice is how KH1 bosses generally throw out one attack at a time, whereas in KH2, they'll usually perform a full combo. Similar to the first game, Sephiroth's fight focuses more on swordplay than a gimmick. He has a similar 3 phases, and a few moves shared between the games with differences to suit their systems. His Supernova attack in KH1 carries over its meteor portion, specifically targeting Sora in the arena now. His Heartless Angel attack now has him floating in the air as he chants, and is followed by his reaction command if completed. These changes come as a result of the variety of quicker movement options added in KH2. KH2 also has a staggered and retaliation system applied to humanoid bosses, similar to KH1, to both give the player an opening for a combo, and the enemy a chance to break free of an extended combo. This is satisfying since it rewards the player for finding openings, but also gives the enemy a chance to fight back. Though there is the downside that sometimes a retaliation can't be reacted to by a Sora mid-combo. Similar to KH1, Sephiroth's battle in this game is a clear step up from the story bosses, and shows the potential of this game's combat system. If you're playing the original release of the game, that's the toughest challenge you'll get. But lucky for us, there was another release, Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. This game added new abilities, a new difficulty, and a few new fights. There's even a whole new area added to Radiant Garden, the Cavern of Remembrance. It's a really neat place that's totally optional and actually uses growth abilities. And getting through it takes you to the Garden of Assemblage, a waterfall room with a kiosk in the middle. Pressing triangle on the screen introduces us to the next wave of super bosses, the we love casting spells. That's right, Organization 13 is back at it again. But it's not really them. They're all dead. This is the Data Organization. All 13 members have fights available here, and this is the coolest super boss presentation we've seen so far. It was neat having the bosses in the first game in different worlds, and starting the fights by talking to Disney characters. But the screens coming out of the waterfalls begging to be interacted with is on a whole nother level. Even the members beaten in Castle Oblivion show up here after their absent silhouettes are defeated. These fights are powered up versions of every org member. Throughout a playthrough of KH2, you may notice that each world has a battle level. That's the recommended level that Sora should be and is essentially the level of the enemies in that world. But there's a few cases where an arena or fight in a world has a different battle level than the rest of the world. This is visible in the Hades Paradox Cups, but it also affects the super bosses. Though it takes place in Hollow Bastion with a battle level of 45, Sephiroth's fight has a battle level of 80. And the Garden of Assemblage, with every Data Organization member, has a battle level of 99. So you're expected to be finished grinding before even attempting these fights. This is a big change from the first game, where, while it helps, you're not expected to be max level for any of the super bosses. But back to the fights themselves, while they take place in the same arenas as the weaker fights, the Data bosses have much more health and do more damage now since they've leveled up. They also have altered attack patterns and behavior to add difficulty. Some blatant examples of this are Xigbar no longer needing to reload, Luxord's minigame timing being tougher, and Dimix's water clone numbers changing. Aside from these changes, the difficulty comes from the huge health bars. This means you'll have to go through more cycles of the boss's attacks, and unless you're experienced with the fights, you'll have to handle every boss's desperation move at least once. These fights are similar to how the Colosseums have stronger versions of bosses previously fought, but turned up to the max and with a really unique presentation. This starts another trend of super bosses being more difficult versions of story bosses, but the introduction of the Garden of Assemblage gives a cool new presentation to a super boss Colosseum. And that only leaves one more, often considered the hardest boss in the game, Lingering Will. This boss follows the trend Unknown set in KH1. hinting towards Birth by Sleep with his appearance. He wields a Keyblade, and gives the first instance we've seen of Keyblade transformations, with the cannon, bow, whip, and bike appearing. He has 8 different attacks with some of the tightest reaction windows in the game. His mobility is also insane, dashing across the huge arena instantly. He also has an armor mechanic unique to this fight. Hits do very little damage initially, but as more hits connect, they deal more damage. This means that longer combos are better for fighting him, since they will weaken his armor and make him vulnerable. Similar to Sephiroth and Unknown in KH1, Lingering Will pushes the action combat of KH2 to its limit with its tight combos and attack patterns. And now that we've mentioned all of the bosses, I do want to point out a mechanic present in some of them that wasn't as easy in the first game: cheese. This game has a few methods that can be used to easily defeat some of the super bosses without them being able to get an attack off. Using Fenrir and Negative Combo, or the Peter Pan summon are common examples. This can essentially stun lock some of the bosses and combo them to death, with them never retaliating. This works on Roxas, Syx, Axel, Marluxia, Larxene, and Lingering Will. I thought this was worth mentioning because it's possible in some way on almost half of the super bosses in this game. There wasn't really anything like that in the first game, and it can be seen as a little blemish that some of the tougher fights in the game can be beaten pretty easily, but those are strange methods that are unlikely to be found in most playthroughs. In their intended fights, these bosses utilize all of the mechanics present in KH2 and push them to the limit, similar to KH1. If you look at the super bosses from the first and second game next to each other, you may notice a difference. KH2 only has humanoid super bosses, and while there are a few bosses with puzzle elements like in Luxord's fight, most of them lean towards action combat. This is a big change from the first game, which had several monster super bosses and utilized environmental and puzzle elements. While KH1's super bosses show hints of the many genres it took influence from, KH2 chooses to focus in more on the action aspect. It is a shift, but each boss still retains the satisfaction from beating them that has been present through the whole series up to this point, with every battle feeling fair and possible once you learn to fight and prepare accordingly. With the number of super bosses greatly increasing and retaining the high quality, it seemed the series was on an upward trend and would continue to deliver those engaging and rewarding challenges. Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep is the first handheld game we'll be talking about, and it had a lot of big changes when it came to the PSP. It's the first game to use the Command Deck system, greatly changing the combat. But let's see what impact it had on the super bosses. This time, the first release of the game had 2 super bosses instead of 1. The first super boss you'd fight in the game is Vanitas Remnant. His design is basically Vanitas, but with white detailing. He has a lot of attacks similar to the other Vanitas fights, but adds some new ones too, including using Shadow Clones and this Dark Fang attack. He'll generally attack back to back, sometimes even cancelling one attack to immediately start another. A lot of his attacks also apply the new status effects added in Birth by Sleep. He has a pretty small health bar for a super boss, but that's because of his healing mechanic. If the player uses a cure spell, so will he, forcing the player to bring healing items instead and limiting the total healing possible. A good counter to spamming cure. He's a neat fight where they take an old boss and put a spin on it to add difficulty. He'll also randomly stagger or just ignore the player if attacked at some point, and he'll randomly break out of combos to retaliate, a trend that affects most Birth by Sleep super bosses. Defeating him is required to fight the hardest super boss in the original release, the dreaded Mysterious Figure. This is Birth by Sleep's boss to hint at future games, with his secret identity being young Xehanort as he appears at Dream Drop Distance. He has several flashy and original moves like you'd expect from a new boss. Along those is a whirlwind attack that launches players' commands across the battlefield, creating shadow clones of himself, and even turning invisible. Similar to Vanitas Remnant, he can randomly break out of some combos, and even has the ability to use Renewal Block while being comboed. Mysterious Figure becomes more aggressive as the fight goes on, and uses new attacks. While there's several interesting components of this boss, and he's a real spectacle to watch, he is often regarded as one of the most disliked in the series. This is because his attacks have such a huge range and long-lasting activity that the player can often be caught by an unexpected attack, even when it seems like you played it correctly. He also has random stagger and retaliation, with the only consistent weak point being after his X/ attack. So rather than learning his patterns and weak points, players left spamming dodge roll until this attack is used, and then countering with a quick command. These super bosses from the original release of the game are a big change from how the series has approached them in the past, going from learning a boss's patterns or gimmick to sneaking in quick hits while the boss is relentlessly throwing out attacks. There have now also been 18 superbosses in a row in the series that are humanoid in their character design, so the series has definitely shifted from the mix of the first game. That is until we get to the next release, Birth by Sleep Final Mix, where it's you against the world. This world to be exact, Monstro. The entire world from the 2002 release Kingdom Hearts, but this time we're fighting him. First, the player will start inside Monstro, where you defeat a mob of enemies before getting sneezed out. Then the player will be on a small island with a few rafts surrounding. Spread around the area will be explosive barrels that can be used to attack Monstro from afar and create openings. He only has a few attacks, with the main gimmick being launching barrels at him. There's a timer in the corner during the Monstro phase, and once it counts down, he'll swallow you again, starting another mob fight. This cycle repeats until either Monstro is beaten, or the player is spit out 4 times. Monstro is a unique monster superboss that adds a lot of fun ideas. His whale phase is also a return to the environmental elements appearing in a fight, taking us out of the mostly flat arenas for the first time since KH1. Similar to the monster bosses in that game, he is pretty easy once you figure out the tricks, but it's an interesting mix-up to how bosses have been appearing. And then we get to the next boss, the Armor of Ericus, that reels us back into humanoid superbosses in flat arenas. This is Mr. Ericus's armor, sort of like another Lingering Will, but now it's in the Mirage arena. He shares similar attack effects to Ericus, with the chains and light theme. There's a few attacks that are carried over from his fight with Terra, but plenty of new moves appear. Among those are his new command style changes. Depending on which character is fighting the armor, he will have different attacks and glow a different color. His attacks are reminiscent of that character's command style, so he'll have attacks giving Spellweaver for Aqua, Critical Impact for Terra, and Fever Pitch for Ventus. He also has a temporary power-up if he catches the player, forcing you on the defensive. As interesting and unique as this boss is, taking advantage of the multiple playable characters to change up his attack patterns, he shares similar gameplay to Mysterious Figure, where dodging and throwing out quick attacks or shot locks is the main gameplay loop. But that takes us to the last boss, No Heart. This is Xemnas' armor from the end of KH2, sort of like another Lingering Will. This fight takes place in the Land of Departure, and has 2 very distinct phases. The first has No Heart sitting on the throne with the No Name Keyblade floating on a wall of darkness. The target during this phase will be No Name, while various waves of Keyblades and Dark Volleys are shot at the player. After that, No Heart enters the fight, and the real challenge begins. Many of his moves have a clear influence from Terra's commands, if not being taken directly from him, like with Sonic Impact and Dark Haze. Aside from those, he has several unique attacks. Many new Keyblade transformations also debut here: a Claw, Shin Guard, Drone, and Wings, each offering a variety of new attacks to handle. He also has an attack similar to Sephiroth's Heartless Angel, where he flies up in the air and creates a giant explosion that sets the player's HP to 1 and drains their command and focus gauge. These super bosses are all visually amazing, and some of the coolest in the series to just look at their attacks and animations, though the battle system brings down the experience, with it being a little shallow in the late game. But the inclusion of super bosses at all, let alone 5, is a big step up for handheld games in the series. We even saw a return to monster super bosses with Monstro. The gameplay was a little repetitive thanks to the battle system, but the creativity and design was there in troves with this entry. It was at this point where the Kingdom Hearts series entered an awkward phase, where super bosses became fewer and less cinematic. Starting with Dream Drop Distance, there's only one boss generally considered a super boss, Julius. This is one of the few super bosses to be a Disney original character. It takes place in the fountain area of Traverse Town, and it's a neat arena. The fight's straightforward, with Julius using his fists and body to attack. Once about half of his health is gone, he'll enter his second phase, where he gets a lightning effect that he adds to his other attacks. Overall, this is a really neat character pull, but the fight itself is pretty simple and straightforward. While that's the only super boss in Dream Drop Distance, this game does have its own data organization. Sort of. Portals appear where all of the bosses are defeated, and can be used to fight a powered-up version of them. They do a lot more damage and sometimes mix up the boss's patterns so they do stronger attacks earlier. But it's never really remembered in the same light as KH2's data organization, whether it be to it not having a cool visual like the Garden of Assemblage, or their difficulty not really being as super as other bosses. But that's it for Dream Drop Distance. There was no final mix version to add more bosses. So let's talk about some of the other games with very few quick super bosses, starting with 179 Days. There's no boss directly called out as a super boss, but it's generally agreed that the Dust Flyer Heartless is the closest it's got. He's an optional enemy in Mission 89 after the other 6 Heartless bosses are defeated. He's a stronger version of the Flying Dragon Heartless that appears several times in the game, and his attacks are the same as the tougher versions of those. Since he's bigger, so are the attacks, and they also apply status effects that were introduced in Days. But he's a pretty simple boss, which makes sense since he takes inspiration from a more common enemy. A decent challenge in Days with its simpler combat system, really testing the player's fundamentals. Heading into Recoded now, it's another DS game and has 2 enemies that could be considered super bosses. After completing the highest level system sector, you can fight a bugged Roxas, and on the floor 100 system sector of the Avatar menu, you can fight a bugged Riku. These are similar to their story fights, but become powered up as the fight goes on, getting really big in their final phase. The last game I'm putting in this section is Kingdom Hearts 0.2, A Fragmentary Passage. Since this is a short game, it's understandable that there's only one super boss, Phantom Aqua. After you obtain every Zodiac sign, you can fight a small boss rush before facing a powered up version of Phantom Aqua. Though this seems to be a repeat boss, Phantom Aqua adds a new challenge to the game. The coolest thing that this boss introduces is her orange attacks. These are attacks that indicate they will break through your block, forcing either a dodge or counter. She attacks in combos with various openings that can be punished. And hits stagger her consistently, like in KH1 and 2. She also breaks free of combos at consistent points. She uses attacks that Aqua herself would use, including her desperation move being the Spellweaver command style. She has multiple phases as the fight progresses, where she becomes more aggressive. Compared to the last few games, this was an exciting battle that returned to the satisfying action boss design that had peaked in KH2 thus far. The arrow from Birth by Sleep to Dream Drop Distance had a few interesting bosses with plenty of neat ideas, but the gameplay and satisfaction from conquering the bosses had definitely taken a bit of a dip. Phantom Aqua's fight in 0.2 gave a lot of hope that we'd see a return to the boss fight design expected from the number titles in the series. And to the last numbered KH game at the time of making this, Kingdom Hearts 3 was an overall return to the boss battle styles of KH1 and 2, taking more influence from 2 than 1, with fights focusing mostly on action combat. Both of the numbered games so far only had one super boss in its original release, and Kingdom Hearts loves trends, so they did it again. Allow me to introduce the only super boss in base Kingdom Hearts 3, the ultimate challenge set for the player who has gone the extra mile, Dark Inferno. Found at the Keyblade Graveyard in a large flat arena, this boss fight can be started or rematched using a battle gate. He uses swords to fight, and as the fight progresses, he transitions through 3 phases, glowing a different color in each and upgrading his attacks to be more aggressive. Overall, he's a solid boss, and defeating him is satisfying, with several different strategies being viable. He's a good representation of the fundamentals of KH3, with telegraphed attacks that can be blocked or countered easily once learned. He's often criticized for being too easy though, and he wasn't given much in terms of cinematics. He just appears when the portal is activated, and doesn't have any cutscene when defeated. Compared to Phantom and Sephiroth in past games, he felt like a step down in hype, but still had a solid fight that brought back the system of finding an opening to stagger the boss, then comboing them. Since this was a numbered title, there were additional bosses added later, this time in DLC. After you finish the Remind DLC, you unlock the Limit Cut episode, where all the super bosses are located. This includes the Data That's right, it's the organization again, but this time it's the real Organization 13. Sid gets us set up on his computer to play a Sora and fight the Data Real Organization in a Data Garden of Assemblage. Unlike in KH2, where fights are unlocked by beating them in the main story or their absent silhouette, you start with 11 of the fights right away. During the fights in the Keyblade Graveyard, the organization members use a few attacks, but with all the chaos of facing multiple members, you don't get to appreciate each interaction. Here you get a chance to take on each of them one-on-one with way more depth. The fights are all unique to the character and full of flashy attacks you'd hope to see from them. Similar to the super bosses in KH2, combat is very action heavy, but these bosses push it further. Every boss has several attacks and phases, with openings spread throughout to combo them in return. Most of them even have attacks brand new to the Data fights. For me, this gives them more hype than the KH2 Data organization, since it feels like brand new fights instead of an enhanced version of a previous fight. Like I mentioned earlier, you start with 11 fights available and 2 portals locked. After this first batch is beaten, you unlock Xion and Master Xehanort's portals as the final challenges. I think the Data Real Organization fights are the best squad of super boss fights in the entire series. Every one is uniquely cinematic to a point we don't often see in the series, with new ideas introduced throughout. A great example is Master Xehanort and Xion having attacks that just lower Sora's max HP instead of doing damage, totally changing how you regroup and retaliate in the fight. There's also hits that break through guard, similar to what Phantom Aqua used. While the series has maintained its interesting visuals in most super bosses up to this point, the data reel organization is a full return to the fun difficulty of the first two games, and yet they're fair and satisfying like we've come to expect from numbered titles in the series. That takes us to the end of our journey, the final super boss, Yozora from Verum Rex. In the secret episode, Sora runs into Yozora in the final world, and they start a fight in a city. I'm pretty confident in saying that this is the toughest boss in the entire series. He has insanely fast attacks, mixing in unblockable hits throughout and having tight windows to punish. As is custom with super bosses, there's also some brand new ideas he introduces. He has a combo that can trap Sora and let Yozora steal his Keyblade temporarily, forcing a defensive playstyle from the player. There's another attack where he shoots this beam at Sora, and if you stay inside it, he can steal health orbs, healing items, and even your Kupo coin if you're unlucky enough. He'll even use the Kupo coin once he's beaten. And his desperation move may be the most cinematic attack in all of Kingdom Hearts. He creates a projector orb thing to totally change the environment, taking you into space where even the gravity changes. Eventually it turns into this polygonal background and Gigas mechs launch at Sora, all while Yozora keeps attacking and the orb explodes. After this, Yozora upgrades some of his attacks and adds some new bait attacks. And when you finally get through all of his health, there's another series first, where the cutscene that plays will be different depending on if you win or lose. A really unique and satisfying ending to a game that gave a lot of new challenges. And based on the secret endings in KH3, Yozora picks up on the trend of super bosses hinting toward future titles, with him likely returning at some point. These fights were a really high note to end on. They met and exceeded expectations of super bosses, and provide so much replayability while we wait for the next game. And that's the last of the super bosses, 44 in total. We really ended on a high note, with the DLC of Kingdom Hearts 3 having some of the best in the series. There were definitely some ups and downs throughout, but defeating super bosses is almost always a good time in these games. In the credits I'll have some of my rankings and other opinions on these bosses. I was very surface level throughout the video, mostly giving my brief review having beaten all of them before, but I'd highly recommend watching an in-depth analysis on your favorite super bosses. There's videos on almost all of them, and the small details are really interesting. But let me know in the comments some of your favorite bosses and why. My personal favorite fight is Xion in KH3. I just love the aesthetic, and Xion as a character is one of my favorites. I'll give an honorable mention to Xemnas in KH3 and Lexaeus in KH2. There are also great fights that I really enjoy. My least favorite is absolutely Mysterious Figure in Birth by Sleep. It's just not fun to do anything in the fight. My top games are definitely the main numbered titles, KH3, 2, and 1, in that order is probably my favorite. But I hope the future non-titled games get a little more care given, sort of like how 0.2 had Phantom Aqua. I loved Birth by Sleep's super boss design and that there's so many of them, but the battle system's a little shallow once you get to the late game and just sort of spam dodge roll. But yeah, that's about it. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite experiences have been with these super bosses, or if I got any small details wrong or missed out on something important. I probably overused the word satisfying, but I think it's the ultimate compliment to a boss fight, and just goes to show how solid the games and fights actually are. Thank you so much for watching.